What's up, crew? Hope you're having a rad day. In this episode, I crash a one-of-a-kind prototype bike. I'm Alan, and this is the MTB Alan channel. I'm Alan, and if I can have a rad day on a bike, so can you. This day was particularly rad because I got to ride the Datum. Oh! This is a bike that has a rear suspension that's been causing quite a bit of buzz in the mountain biking world. As you can see here, it looks like the shock is inside the top tube, or maybe the top tube is the shock? Well, it's kind of both of those, but also neither of those, but also something kind of different. We're gonna cover that, but let's do some basics first. The Datum is a mixed wheel bike, so it's got the 27.5 in the back and the 29er up front. It settles right into that all mountain or trail bike. When I rode it, it was more of a trail bike with 140 in the back and 150 up front. If you look at the geometry chart of this bike, it's pretty standard. There were a few things that stuck out to me. Compared to something like an SB150 or the Bronson, the seat tube angle was about 2 degrees slacker, even though the head tube angle was about the same as those two bikes. I also found it weird that the front center and the rear center was pretty comparable to both of those comparison bikes, while the wheelbase was like half an inch or more shorter. In any case, pretty standard bike. If you want to look at that geometry chart in detail, you can check the link in the description for the Kickstarter page for the Datum. Now, throughout this video, keep in mind that we are talking about a prototype. So, for instance, the rear triangle on the bike is actually off of a Bronson, which of course isn't going to be the case with the production bike. Also, the rear suspension on the bike didn't have the kind of external damping settings that you're going to find on something like a Float X2. I'm assuming that the production bike is going to have a reasonable amount of knobs and clickers and whatnot for you to be able to do that. Now, let's get to the fun part. What the heck is going on with that top tube shock thingy thing? So the Datum uses the top tube to house its air and oil chambers, and the movement of the shaft basically replaces the top link of a 4-bar linkage system. So the idea is, with the movement of that shaft and everything else being the same, you basically reproduce the kinematics of a 4-bar linkage system. It's not the same, but it's analogous to that 4-bar linkage system. That's the idea, but what is it actually like on the trail? So I got to ride this bike on some flowy trails, some chunky stuff, some steep stuff, even a couple of jumps, and I'm sorry to say this, but it's kind of just like a normal bike. Like a normal trail bike anyway. There were some things I did and didn't like about it, but there was nothing like just kind of out of the range weird. Pedaling up, it felt pretty good. I did feel a little bit stretched out on the bike, which was a little bit weird because climbing it felt long, but when I would descend, the bike actually felt a bit shorter, which for me is a little bit backwards. I kind of like it to go the other way. Maybe that's just me. That being said, in the flow trails, it was snappy. It's a sporty bike. Held its momentum, really easy to control. Off the jumps, sending it off the bridge, just felt pretty good, felt pretty composed. In the chunk, again, still pretty composed.
Right, don't follow my line.
I didn't really get along with it that well when it started to get steep.
Oh shit! Oh shit!
That bike sucks!
Yeah, that didn't go so well, and in a couple of other parts where it was steppy, I did feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Oh shit!
Now, all that being said, keep in mind this is a prototype, but more importantly, you might notice that I'm not really talking about the activity of the actual suspension. I'm mostly talking about geometry changes. The thing about the suspension system is it just kind of worked. I mean, it pretty much felt like a 4-bar linkage system with an air spring. And if you ask me, that's pretty cool because we're talking about a suspension system that's like pretty dang new. And it's been able to reproduce the kinematics of an existing successful suspension system. Now, coming from the other side, you might be thinking, with all this innovation, what's the point if you've got the same kinematics as a lot of these other kind of 4-bar linkage systems? And honestly, I kind of thought the same thing. Fortunately, Tim Lane, the mastermind behind all of this, had quite a bit to say about that. He gave me a whole bunch of reasons why he thought this system was better. And again, if you want to go to the Kickstarter page, check the link in the description because there's a whole bullet list of the benefits that he lays out. But there were definitely a few things that stuck out to me. One of those things is that there's just overall fewer parts, and that means a lighter bike. According to Tim and a few other articles I read, it ends up being about a pound of difference on the bike, and the fewer parts should, in theory, mean less servicing. Now you might be thinking this is a unique and innovative suspension system. How am I going to service this, or how am I even going to get it serviced? But from what I understand, there's no proprietary parts in this suspension system. And as far as the tools that you need, I guess they're just basic bike shop tools, nothing weird, but yeah, pretty basic tools. Of course, I'm probably not going to be able to service one of these things without some sort of training, and I do wonder, like, is my local bike shop going to be able to do this? But looking at it, I'm guessing, I don't really know. Maybe you know. Maybe you can go look at the site and look at it, and you tell me in the comments if you think it's the kind of thing you could service. And the last thing that really stuck out to me was the fact that you have just much more space in that top tube. So you have a suspension system that's got more volume. So higher volume air and oil means you can run lower pressures. And at lower pressures, the whole system is going to be stressless. And that says to me, at least hypothetically, the whole thing should need just generally less service and ideally be more dependable. Of course, these are just kind of things that are going on in my head, thinking about physics and stuff like that. Would love to hear what you think about that in the comments, talking to me, who is definitely not an engineer. Overall, I think the whole thing is just pretty cool. I mean, we're talking about taking a structural thing, the top tube, and our suspension system, the shock, and the linkage, and just kind of putting them all together and actually making it work. I think that's pretty dang neat. And also just generally bringing innovation to the bike industry. I do definitely have some questions. If you have, I'm sure you've got questions. If you do, put them in the comments. I'll maybe even see if I can get Tim Lane in there to answer some of them, and I'll do whatever I can to answer them. One question I do have is, you know, because the top tube and the rear suspension is like directly integrated, I wonder how much of iteration you're going to be able to get with geometry in this bike. Like if you want to change the kinematics, you know, the leverage ratio, like the angle of the top tube and all that kind of. If you're more engineering than me, I would just leave a comment and just kind of let me know what you think. All right, so clearly there's a lot of things that I'm not sure about, and I have more questions than answers, but one thing I'm sure about is that you should go have a rad day.
I'm good. There's a big hole here, but I think it's mostly from my body. All right.